Hello, everybody. I'm Congressman Anthony Gonzalez. Welcome to my first quarterly update. We're going to do these once a quarter. The goal is to basically just give a status update on what the office is up to, what we're focusing on, and then also obviously to give everybody a forum to ask questions. Over the last day or so, you've been submitting questions. We've printed them out. And then also as you're going, please feel free to submit questions as well. And we'll answer all in a timely manner. If not on this one, then the next one. So again, thank you. The first thing I would say is thank you for sending me here to all my constituents and to the voters. It's been an interesting first 3 months. As many of you remember, we started in the middle of the longest government shutdown in American history, which is an inauspicious way to start a term. But happily, we're through that. With respect to the economy, I want to start there. As many of you know, my top priority as your representative is to make sure that the Northeast Ohio economy and the United States economy remains robust and strong, and families have all the opportunity to raise their children in a productive way. So with that, on a national level, March job report, 196,000 new jobs were added in the month, bringing the total to more than 5.1 million since January 2017. With this, we've seen notable job gains in healthcare, professional and technical services. From what we can tell on a local level, from February's preliminary numbers, Ohio's unemployment rate sits stable at 4.6%. And according to Jobs Ohio, there were 27,000 jobs added to the Ohio economy and 69,000 or almost 70,000 retained. Despite these gains, Northeast Ohio, obviously we suffered a major loss. This isn't in the district, but I think anything that negatively impacts the Northeast Ohio economy hits us all in a sense. And that's what happened with Lordstown, excuse me. Thousands of jobs were let go, and this tells us what we need to do a better job connecting and training our available workforce for these jobs. Anytime a factory shuts down, again, we know that can be devastating for a community, and we want to do everything we can to ensure that doesn't happen again going forward, and that there's ample opportunities for those who were displaced as a result of the closing. What my office has accomplished from a constituent services perspective, I've set my goal for our team to have the best constituent services in the country. And so that means when you reach out to our office, if there's a way for us to help you, we are going to do it, and that's been our commitment. In case you haven't heard yet, we have two offices. One is in Canton and one is in Strongsville. Both are open for business. Please feel free to stop by, call in, however we can help we want to. In just 3 months, we've responded to 4,937 letters, met with 337 different groups and businesses in Ohio's 16th District, held 527 meetings in DC, most of which were with constituents, and hosted 5 roundtables and 2 open houses, just to highlight a few things. Additionally, we've opened 410 cases with the federal government for constituents and already closed 94 with favorable outcomes. These cases have ranged from helping a constituent recover payment for services rendered to U.S. Customs and Border Patrol during the government shutdown to helping a constituent receive money from Social Security, which had been pending since 2018. Furthermore, we've launched a Veterans Resource Tour to bring resources from around the area together in one place for veterans access. Our first event in Massillon saw 103 veterans connected to resources. It's been a huge focus of ours, taking care of our veterans community, doing everything we can, and I'm proud of the work that the office has done so far. What Congress has done, the short answer is not much, unfortunately. As I mentioned earlier, we started the year in the middle of the longest government shutdown in history. And a lot of the bills we've been discussing, roughly 20% of the bills that have come to the House floor, have been messaging bills. And when I say messaging, they have no force of law. So they're just a quote-unquote sense of the House. And one that got a particular amount of coverage was after one of the members on the other side of the aisle made some anti-Semitic remarks. A bill came, the sense of the House, that we condemned, all bad things essentially. I thought we should have condemned anti-Semitism pretty directly, but for whatever reason we didn't go down that path. And so these votes that we're making, I want to be clear on something. These do not change law. These don't do anything to change the law. All these are statements, essentially. And so going forward, I've decided to vote present on them because, frankly, I don't think we should be wasting our time on these. And they're important issues, but the way you solve them is by changing the law, not by making proclamations. And so to give you a sense, we are only here a certain amount of time, and so time is our most limited resource. And if we're wasting it spending days and hours talking about statements as opposed to policy that is actually going to make the lives of Northeast Ohioans better, I think it's a waste of time. And so I don't want to participate in that. I want to participate in lawmaking. That's what I signed up for. I think that's what she sent me here to do. So there's that. The last one we did, where I started voting President will, was with respect to protecting people with pre-existing conditions if Obamacare is ruled unconstitutional at the Supreme Court level. So I voted present on that, but let me be clear on this. The very first bill that I co-sponsored, the very first as a member of Congress, was a bill that would protect people with pre-existing conditions if the ACA is invalidated by the courts. And so I've been firm on that from day one. I will always fight to protect people with pre-existing conditions, but what we voted on wouldn't have done that. All that was a proclamation. I want to codify it into law. Seems like that would be a better option. Beyond that, back in the district, we've hosted a handful of roundtables throughout the district on healthcare and many other important issues, and we'll continue to do that. My commitment is to articulate my own healthcare policy, my own healthcare plan, as soon as we're ready, frankly. The healthcare system, I did a post on this last week, the healthcare system is awfully complex, awfully complicated, but I think we need to agree first on the goals. What goals do we have as legislators for our healthcare system? And to me, there's a handful that are pretty simple. So number one, no family should go bankrupt as a result of healthcare costs in the United States. That's a goal that we can accomplish, and I think it's an important one. Number two, and this is kind of how we have to get there, we have to bring the entire cost of the system down. Whether we're talking about prescription drugs, hospital stays, doesn't matter where you interact with the healthcare system, it's too expensive right now. And so we need to look at policies that are going to bring that down. I'm for free market principles. I would argue we don't have that today. Any market is going, in order for a market to work, to be efficient, you need a handful of things. At a minimum, you need competition and you need price transparency. So you need people to know what items cost, and you need to have multiple options. In many cases, we have neither. So if you try to even price shop as a healthcare consumer in this country, it's near impossible. And so I think, again, to me, we need to get more of a free market system where we're empowering individuals and families to make real choices, all under the umbrella of ensuring that no family goes bankrupt as a result of healthcare costs. Big issue, working on it. I want your feedback on things that you think are important. And if you don't like the goals I just articulated, please send in alternative goals, because I think that's a discussion worth having. Once we agree on the framework, the policy should fall off of that pretty straightforwardly. More local issues, Camp Garfield. So I've been spearheading an effort to get the next missile defense site located at Camp Garfield. Again, it is near Lordstown. I think there's an economic reason why that would be very beneficial to Northeast Ohio, but also from a national security standpoint, which should come first in this discussion. We have everything that we need. We have an incredible workforce. We have the Ohio National Guard that frankly is top notch. And we have infrastructure, great infrastructure in Ohio, with our highways, our ports, our rail, so we can get up and down the state. We can get all over the country, and so I just think it would be a great option for Northeast Ohio. I look forward to supporting the administration and hopefully getting them to locate that at Camp Garfield. Secondly, US Route 30. Again, this is an infrastructure project. There's been talk about this for a long time in Stark County, and I think now would be a perfect time for us to commit the resources to make sure that we widen Route 30, and that, again, we create a pathway to get goods and services all through the economy. And so I think that would be a great option. The first bill that I introduced, that I wrote myself, was the Fallen Warrior Battlefield Cross Memorial Act. And what this would do is prevent the removal of battlefield cross memorials from our national cemeteries. For whatever reason, somebody decided to start removing those. And I think it's important, again, that we show our respect for our veterans, we show our respect for our families, especially those who have lost somebody defending our nation and our way of life. This was a bill that Congressman Renacci authored last Congress. It almost made it to the finish line. They just ran out of time. And so I wanted to pick up the slack and see if we can get this codified into law. Lastly, and then we'll turn over to questions, it's appropriation season, which means that part of my job is speaking with, I guess you'd call it lobbying the other members of Congress who are on the Appropriations Committee to make sure that our Northeast Ohio priorities are funded. And so for me, a lot of that has been on NASA Glenn, but also advocating for funding to address the skills gap in our manufacturing industry and across the entire economy, to help connect unemployed workers to the nearly 500,000 open jobs in manufacturing across the country. And then finally, also, we've been working to make sure that the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative receives full funding. And so those are kind of local issues from an appropriation standpoint that we've been working on, that we've been sending letters. And again, I think of this as kind of lobbying other members of Congress. Just let me make sure that they're hearing Northeast Ohio's story. And one good thing, all members in the Ohio delegation, whether you're Republican or Democrat, are working together on most of these initiatives. So I think this is a great place to celebrate the bipartisanship and the collaboration inside of the caucus, the Ohio caucus. And so, great news on that front. And then with that, we will turn it over to some questions. And again, I'd remind you, if you have any, shoot them in on the website, and we'll get to them. But we'll start first with this stack here. So the first one comes from Photo Guy Roger. That's a good name. The United States needs to follow the lead of all other civilized countries in regards to healthcare. Most other westernized countries have less expensive healthcare, and it covers all citizens. The U.S. healthcare system has been broken for decades and is not better than other countries, just more expensive. The insurance companies, hospitals, and doctors are the ones reaping the bucks, and citizens are paying the bills because they have no lobbying power like the medical field has. So Anthony Gonzalez, are you prepared to resist the lobbying industry and to fight for your constituents? Great question. And so first off, the simple answer is yes, of course. We're always looking to fight for our constituents. I mentioned earlier briefly what I'm focused on, and my focus on healthcare, which is again to ensure that no families go bankrupt as a result of catastrophic healthcare costs. Two, to bring the cost of the entire system down, and to do that with market-based principles. So you are right that most other countries have less expensive healthcare and they can cover more people. You're 100% right about that. I will say this though, every single country does it differently. So there's this thought, I think, that, well, we should just have Medicare for all because isn't that what everyone else does? And the answer to that is absolutely not. So if you were to look at, for example, what Singapore does versus what Canada does, you're talking about two completely different healthcare systems. And so everything gets lumped into this catch-all of Medicare for all. And I just want to caution you to think that that means all countries have Medicare for all, because that is absolutely not true. None of them have what's being proposed on Medicare for all. And Senator Sanders just released it, but the proposal would cost our country between $25 trillion and $35 trillion over a 10-year period with no plan to pay for it. I think if we're being honest, the rhetoric will say millionaires and billionaires should pay for it. That wouldn't work. So just like mathematically, that wouldn't work. The only way you could pay for this is probably through some sort of national sales tax around 25%. So if you wanted a national sales tax at that rate, we could pay for the Bernie Sanders version. But again, he doesn't put that in the bill anywhere. So again, I want to, so I guess in one sense agree with you, and then in the second sentence just say be very, very careful when you see things like Medicare for all and think, oh, everyone else is doing this. No one else is doing that. I've just full stop, no one else is doing that. But I think we absolutely need to improve our healthcare outcomes, because you're right, our system should work better for families, and it just doesn't, and it hasn't for a long time. Next question from Lee Prug. I hope I got that right. What do you foresee as the biggest hangups in budget negotiations, and what do you believe is your part in addressing them? So right now, the budget, we don't have one. So the majority party was supposed to produce one a few months ago, I think back in February. We're still waiting on that. We were going to vote for it or we were going to vote on raising the budget caps, not a budget, just raising the budget caps. I would have voted no on that, by the way, but just raising the budget caps. We were going to vote on that this week, but the majority party couldn't get the votes, as far as they could tell, to do that. They have disagreement in their own party, and so we have not seen that budget. So there is no budget. The only budget we've seen is from the president's. I'll address that with the next question. But Congress hasn't produced its budget yet, and so what we're waiting on is to see it. And once we see it, then that'll kick off the negotiations, and hopefully we can really get into the teeth of it and make sure that funding's going to the right places. We're making cuts where we need to, and things like that. Great question. Next one's from Larry. Where do you stand on current 2019-20 President Trump's budget, and where should changes be made? How do we reduce our $22 trillion debt? Obviously a very complex process and issue. Key points, please. Great question. So I believe that our deficit and debt situation is the biggest long-term drag on our economy and our future as a nation. We spend a lot of money in this town. We don't invest very well. I think there's a difference between the two of those. And all of our spending right now is all of our spending is crowding out other areas. So CBO put this out. By 2025, we will spend more on interest on our debt than we do in defense. So just interest payments is going to crowd out all the discretionary spending. So we absolutely have to get it under control. I'm somebody who thinks we need to go to zero-based budgeting, and what that means in technical terms is you start from scratch and you fund the programs. You look at each one of them individually and decide where you need to go from a funding standpoint. I think that would have a big impact. But the reality is, we are coming up on a very important discussion where we as a country are going to have to decide how we handle our entitlement programs, because the reality is the funding isn't adequate right now, and that's why that's the biggest driver of the debt. The biggest driver of the debt is Medicare, and so we have to make sure that we make good on the promises that we made to working families who worked their entire career counting on Social Security and Medicare. So we can't cut those programs. I think that I don't like using the term morally wrong in DC, because this is an amoral place in so many ways, but I do think it would be morally wrong to not make good on promises that have been made to people for a very long time. And so I think we need to protect those programs, get them to a sustainable, solvent place. And if we do that, that will drive the debt and deficit down. But it will take reform. And to me, I always say, look, if you've been paying into the program your entire life, you rely on Social Security and Medicare, we should protect it for you. We should secure it for you. But for me, my generation, it needs to look totally different, or else it won't be there. And so you can start, with me. I'm 34 years old. We can reform it on me and my generation. I'm fine with that because I want to secure it. But right now, that's the biggest driver of the debt and deficit. So great question. Let's see. Julie Sutton. Who on your staff can constituents with specific expertise and experience in healthcare and public health speak to about healthcare policy issues? So the answer is me. If you have insight, this is a priority of mine. I want to define a plan. I want to present that plan. I want every constituent to know where I stand on healthcare, what I think would be best. And so if you have issues, if you have specific ideas, I want to hear them. Please reach out. Reach out to my office. You can get us through our website. You can stop by the offices in the district if you're in DC and I'm here, obviously. But I want your feedback because this is important. I think it's the number one issue right now for our constituents is creating a health system of healthcare that actually works and that is worthy of the American people. Right now, our system isn't there. So thank you for that question. Secondly, please clarify how the Born Alive bill will help anyone. It is already and always has been illegal to kill babies born alive. Medical personnel should not be prosecuted for not providing invasive and futile treatments when palliative care is a compassionate, appropriate response. So I never thought that I would have to vote on or be advocating for something like the Born Alive bill. It seems common sense. I agree with you. When we're talking about Born Alive, we're not talking about abortion anymore, right? Like, no matter how you feel about the abortion issue, it's a contentious issue, okay? I'm pro-life, I know other people aren't, but that's a contentious issue. But we're talking about babies who are actually born alive. And if you saw the comments from Governor Northam, and you saw the law, Virginia's governor, Governor Northam, you saw the law that they're advocating for, he actually says, and you can just look it up on YouTube, in certain situations, the baby would be born, they would be made comfortable, and then the mom and the doctors would have a discussion. I don't know how to interpret that other than that there is a situation where a child could be born alive and you could kill the baby. I just don't know how to get around that. I mean, I think he's pretty clear on that. And so I think this is common sense. This is actually bipartisan right now. We have a handful of Democratic co-sponsors on this because, again, I just don't see it as being a partisan issue. And so it would certainly help those, whoever Governor Northam was referring to when he made those comments about the baby would be kept safe and what have you while a discussion takes place, that's who it would help. Again, I'm kind of dumbfounded that we even have to have this discussion, but it's a weird time, so thank you for that. This one is from Pam Manges. Pam says, I'm concerned about the proposed cuts to NIH funding in the president's budget. We need increases, not decreases for research funding. Will you support no cuts for cancer funding, an increase, not a decrease? So I support an appropriations letter, I was mentioning that earlier, to fully fund the NIH. And so we can say this is one where we are in agreement, Pam. So thank you for your question. This one is Mike the fireman. First off, thanks for all you do for our community, Mike, assuming you are in fact a fireman. In Ohio, the changes in health insurance are resulting in financial hardship to retirees, specifically on fixed incomes. What are your plans for retired public safety employees to ensure fiscal viability promised them by the state? So a couple things, right? So I think we're talking about public safety employees. I think the healthcare is probably coming from the state itself. And so I think the best thing that I can do is work with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, work with anybody in Congress to drive the entire cost of the system down. That is the number one thing. The biggest problem we have is our healthcare costs are exceeding our ability to pay for them. They're going up 5 to 10 to 20% a year, depending on the service, but incomes aren't growing at that rate. And neither are revenues, federal revenues or state revenues. And so we have to get the cost under control. And so that will forever be my biggest, excuse me, that will forever be my biggest priority as I'm working through the healthcare plan. And one thing I guess I do want to mention, so this is I think the third or fourth question on healthcare. This is why it's so important. This is why I want to work on it. I know it's frustrating for everybody. It's frustrating for me. I don't know if everybody knows this, but as members of Congress, we get our health care through the exchanges. I'm on Obamacare. I'm on the ACA. My wife and I and our son, and so we feel it similarly, and so we want to reform it for all of you and for the entire country because it's important. And I'm glad you're still asking about it because if we don't get this right, frankly, I think everything else is kind of secondary to that. So I'm committed to it, and I appreciate the question. So this one is from Elizabeth Schlitz. So thanks for the opportunity. I am a constituent and would very much appreciate hearing about your thinking on several recent votes. I see that you voted against H.R. 1, the For the People Act, to preserve citizens' voting rights, H.R. 7, the Paycheck Fairness Act, to promote equal pay for equal work, and H.R. 8, the Bipartisan Background Checks Act. Americans overwhelmingly support access to voting, equal pay, and background checks, so advancing these goals would seem to be utterly bipartisan priorities. Can you please help us understand why you oppose each of these bills, and or if you have plans of your own to eliminate obstacles to our exercising our voting rights, to promote equal pay for equal work, or to stop rising tide of gun violence in the U.S.? Thanks again. Thank you for your question, Elizabeth. Thank you for the way in which you asked it. So first, we'll kind of take these in order. So H.R. 1 was the voting rights bill that the Democrats put forward at the beginning of Congress. That's their first bill. I oppose it for a variety of reasons, but the main one is I believe it represented a federal takeover of what is essentially a state process, which is your Board of Elections, your Secretaries of State. I believe that we have the best Secretary of State in the country. I think Frank LaRose is incredible, and he's brilliant, and he understands these issues backwards and forwards, certainly better than the members of Congress. I want to empower Frank and all future secretaries of state in Ohio to run our elections in the way that they see fit alongside of Ohio's legislature. And so that's the basic answer to why I objected to it. But there was a second piece in there as well, which was a federal matching, and it was hard to know exactly, they were kind of all over the place on this, but federal matching of campaign contributions up to a certain place. And so I just don't think that we should be taking your taxpayer dollars and putting it in our campaigns at just a basic level. I don't think that's a good idea. I think that there's a lot that we should do on campaign finance reform, or could do, I should say. There is too much money in politics. I will agree 100% on that. But the reform that was being advocated for just didn't make sense to me. Why would we tax you to give it to us so we can run campaigns? I mean, it just was kind of a non-starter for me just based on that. But the bigger one is I want to empower Frank. I want to empower Frank LaRose. He's going to do an amazing job. And I'm so happy he's in the position he is. HR 7, Paycheck Fairness Act, Equal Pay for Equal Work. So, like I think most people, certainly me, I am absolutely for equal pay for equal work. I think wherever we see discrimination in pay, we should be working to resolve it. And so I support that as a concept. And by the way, I also introduced alongside of Elise Stefanik the Wage Equity Act to propose a way to help more women get to the table through grants for training and wage negotiation skill program for women. I think that's a good way to go. On this one, the way it basically stated it was, if an allegation is made, sort of guilty till proven innocent, the business, whether it's a small business or a large business, would have to prove that there's no discrimination, as opposed to the other way around where you have to prove discrimination. And so Virginia Fox, who's the ranking member of this committee on our side, called it the No Trial Lawyers Left Behind Act, which I thought was kind of a funny way to say it. But that was basically why I voted against that. But again, supported the Wage Equity Act that Elise Stefanik put forward. And I would ask you to go take a look at that. I think it's just a better way of getting to the same outcome that we all agree on, which is that there should not be discrimination in pay. So the last one, HR 8. So this is a big one, obviously. So increasing school safety and reducing gun violence is a big priority of mine, as it should be for all members. And to me, I think we need to have an honest conversation about what's driving this. Because ultimately, unless we address what I believe is a sickness in our culture, I don't think this will go away under any circumstances. And so I met with as many groups as I could, met with folks on both sides of the aisle on this to vet the issue. And the one thing we all agree on is that we need to do a much better job with mental health. And then red flag laws is another thing that I support, where red flag law would say, if there is documented evidence and you have a court order, there's somebody who has shown clear signs of mental illness and is committed to exacting violence on a community, you could actually go in and remove the weapons from those individuals. That would have stopped, if they had gone through with it, that would have stopped what happened in Parkland. That would have stopped a lot of these. And I think that's probably the only bill that we could enact as a Congress that would reduce these school shootings, which I think are one of the biggest problems we have, obviously. It's horrifying to think of our kids going to school and having to worry about this. And so that's what I'm supporting. And will continue to do so. Let's see. It's another healthcare question. It's a similar question to what we'll read this one. Okay, so this one comes from Jane Lynch. So explain to us why you could not vote, whether symbolic or not, for the ACA. You have not told the truth. Ran about standing up for those who are protected in the ACA with pre-existing conditions, and due to your extreme fear of Trump, you voted present. Disgusting. Thank you for the thoughtful question, Jane. So, a few things. Not afraid of anybody. I am afraid of sharks, deeply, but not anybody, certainly not the president. And as I mentioned earlier, the very first bill that I co-sponsored, literally the very first bill, I think it was in my first week, protected people with pre-existing conditions. So I think I've been pretty clear on that one. If I haven't, I'll say it again. I support protecting people with pre-existing conditions. I will make sure that when we're talking about the law and not symbolism, that we're actually doing a good job. This one's from John Reagan. John says, do you think that students in high schools should consider technical schools as an alternative to four-year universities? So the answer is absolutely. I think we need to inspire our kids to go into wherever the job market is. All of the incentives for the longest time have pushed people directly into the four-year college. And a four-year college is great. I went to a four-year college, went to graduate school. That is a path that makes sense for a lot of people. And where that makes sense, we should encourage it. But the reality is there are great paying jobs that don't require a four-year degree in all sectors of the economy. And I think people they just think the blue-collar world, which is true, but there are also coding schools you could go to and become a computer programmer in 18 months. And so these pathways exist. We need to encourage them. And a lot of that's cultural, but then we as members of Congress need to provide more flexibility in things like Pell Grant funding and make sure that our folks have as many options as possible there. So that's that one. Just another healthcare question. Another healthcare question. Oh, that's the last one. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for your questions today. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you found this helpful. I'm sure there'll be more comments and questions as we go along. Again, just realize we're going to do these quarterly. So if you didn't have your opportunity to get your question answered on this one, we will certainly do it in the next one. And I just want to thank you all, one, for sending me, and two, for your attention today. Thank you.